Welcome back, and you're tuned into the Nafisa Danga Show this morning, where we're going to be talking to many people that can entice you into better spaces and places and teach you to give back in many directions. And that's what the essence of life is about: is being able to create that unison with each other, to be able to uplift and empower each other, and change the types of environments. But obviously, by starting off in your own community as well. This morning, we're going to be speaking to a phenomenal young woman. Her name is Hanneke van Linge. She's the founder and director of Nosh Food Rescue and the founding member of Chefs with Compassion. It is an NGO registered and founded in 2020 in response to the humanitarian crisis brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. A very good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining me on the show this morning.
Morning, Fisa. Hi.
Hi, how are you doing this morning?
I'm good. Sorry about the noisy background.
That's fine. We're quite used to those, so it's fine.
I think we all have, since we're all working from home these days, you get these nice messy backgrounds and, like I said, chickens and parrots today.
That's fine. I think we quite relate to it. But I think the importance is that we're going to be speaking to you about something that's relatively important this morning. But before we even get into that, talk to us a bit about yourself. I find it very interesting that you've come up with this particular concept, but I'm sure there's a characteristic behind it that has edged you on to make you actually want to go out and do this.
You know, I grew up in a very thrifty household. I'm Dutch, and the Dutch are known for being quite thrifty. So we never wasted anything. We always reused and recycled and, all of those kind of concepts. So when I accidentally inherited the soup kitchen in 2015, and somebody arrived one day with 2 big bags of rolls and pies and donuts and said, "We waste this at the bakery every single day. Can you use it?"
Sure.
Needless to say, I was bowled over, and that was the start of my journey learning about food waste. I think I'd always habitually or instinctively realized, yes, there is a lot of waste happening in the world, but I'd never put those two together. So yeah, and that initial once a week soup kitchen has now turned into Nosh Food Rescue, and then at the beginning of COVID, as I said, we started Chefs with Compassion.
And I think that's phenomenal, because the thing is, if we look at the type of foods that are getting wasted, I mean, as you just said now, you're looking at a normal bakery. At the end of the day, why is it that that particular day's food that they made cannot be used the next day? Because there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But I'm sure there's protocols that they have to follow within the food industry. And it's nice to see that you've come in to bridge the gap of what has been happening. And this is what I talk about, is always creating that form of sustainability amongst people. I mean, if you go into just the townships alone, the amount of people, or even if you just look around in your own community, it's actually sad to see how many people are going through food poverty at this point in time. And I think COVID-19 just accelerated that so badly. It's gone a whole lot worse than what it actually was initially.
Yeah. Very much so. We've seen the need quadruple, triple. All of our organizations are saying we need more help. A lot of them have had to drop their original mandates of the projects perhaps that they were doing, and they've started focusing only on feeding. The need in the communities on the ground is dire. Before COVID, there were already 13 million South Africans that were going to bed hungry, that did not know where their next meal was coming from. And that has now turned into almost 50% of our population that is actually considered food insecure, does not know where its next meal is coming from. 1 in 2 people.
That's a very scary thought. I mean, thinking that, which I think we as individuals take a lot for granted many a times in our lives, where, every single day we don't realize that we ourselves are guilty of that wastage. And it's having to, like you say, coming from your type of background, I think you've inspired us to make us think once again of the types of situations we're in, and how we can try and alleviate, firstly, that wastage of food, and secondly, contribute towards this project that is, I think, going out there and making a difference in a very huge way.
So I often say that we as consumers are part of the problem, and not just in that what we actually physically waste in our own homes, but also our buying behaviors. There are, for example, a lot of products, and especially fruit and vegetables, that are not even making it into the retail store because there's this expectation that we have been conditioned with, which is a perfect cucumber, a perfect banana, no blemishes on the tomato, perfectly round apples. And we discard products that are perfectly edible, but maybe not aesthetically pleasing. So even before retail level, there is a lot of waste. So in South Africa, only 18% of the food that does not get eaten is wasted at household level. So everything
Sure.
else up to that 18% is wasted from farm to what referred to as farm to fork. So
Mm.
South Africa wastes annually 10.6 million tons of produce.
Sure.
10.6 million tons do not get eaten by animals or humans. It either gets plowed back into the soil, or it goes to landfill, or it gets discarded in some other way. So that is plenty food to feed half of our population. It's just the mechanisms, the systemic mechanisms and the structure of our whole food system that needs overhauling so that that waste can be accessed. And you're perfectly right saying that there are the systems in place and the rules and the regulations and the safeguards and the
Mm.
liability, the public liability. That structure needs to be looked at so that we can access that perfectly edible food and feed South Africans with it.
Interesting that you bring that up. You brought that up earlier, Hanneke, is the idea of us starting at home, because that's where it starts. That's where the problem starts. Is saying that we take perfectly good food and actually throw it away. It might have a blemish or something on it. Is why not try and salvage it in some way and use it? Alternatively, if we don't want it for ourselves, maybe take it and cook a nice little meal for somebody that's in dire need and go out and give it to them. That would be one of the ways. And I think, as you said, it starts with us. If each South African, each one of us in our homes can start that type of mindset, change the way we're doing things, change the way we're seeing things as far as food wastage is concerned, I'm sure we would then take that figure, and it's a phenomenal figure. It's actually very scary to think that that's the amount of food that's getting wasted every day. Yet we have people in many spaces, like the townships, for example, that are literally going without eating every single day.
Yeah, very much so. And it's not just our personal choices in our homes, it's also our voices. When you come across a supermarket, for example, that has a special on, we sometimes refer to it as ugly fruit, or
Mm.
ugly, whatever misshapen it is, or if they have specials on something that is about to hit sell by date or short dated stock, we should support the stores that do those kinds of things, because they are contributing to reducing food waste. So it's not just our behaviors in our homes where we can make a difference. We can use our voice as a consumer and our voice as an activist to actually start driving more systemic change and to make it more lucrative and attractive for our food purveyors not to waste, and to encourage that interaction between consumer and retailer or restaurateur or hotelier or shop owner. Let's have those conversations. What do you do with your waste? And if it is not fit for human consumption, could they perhaps send it to a pig farmer or a cattle farmer? Could there be a way that it goes to a composting project, for example? As long as we try to keep it out of landfill and actually pump it into the system in a more productive way.
Sure. And I mean, that's getting maximum benefit out of it as opposed to it really going to waste. Like you said, once it goes into the landfill, that's just literally the end of it. But coming back to that particular point that we brought up earlier, how is it that you determine once you've collected all these foods? Is there particular corporates you're working with? Is it communities that you're working with to be able to collect those food hampers, or should we say leftover food that you have, or food that you feel that, there's expiry dates, for example, on certain stores. That of course is still available. It can be still at maybe 2 days later. It's not something. It's just a guide, should we say, those expiry dates. So the food is still in good condition. Is that the types of foods you're going to go out and collect? And do you go to stores, or who is it that you're coming into contact with? Because we'd like to know, as the consumer ourselves, how it is that we could, of course, contribute towards this alleviation of wastage.
So we have relationships with lots of different players in the food sphere. So we, for example, go to the Johannesburg Fresh Produce Market every day, and we have good relationships with the agents that are there marketing produce on behalf of the farmers, and we see what it is that gets rejected there, or maybe that gets donated there. We have relationships with some retailers the way we fetch every day or every second day. We have teams that go to collect, made up out of people from our beneficiary network. And then we get random calls from individuals who maybe have had a large party and they've had a lot of food left over, or farmers who have produce that they haven't been able to market, or they've had heavy rains and it is too damp to be able to package and last on the truck. So what do they do with it? So our sources of produce are very varied and very random. And like I said yesterday, you might have me in the background loading 40 pallets of tinned food, which has reached sell-by date, but not necessarily use before date. And there's a lot of education that needs to be done around what is a best before date. When is it at its crunchiest, at its freshest, at its most delicious? What is a sell-by date, which means a date at which the producer has decided or has determined that it should not be on the shelves any longer to be sold? And then there is the use before date, which starts having implications around safety. Because even if you leave chicken, for example, in your fridge, defrosted for a certain amount of time, that use before date says to you, okay, by now you should either use it or potentially freeze it. And that's something that we tend to forget as consumers, that freezing is a preservative which will extend the lifespan of your food. So there's a lot of education to be done around the type of produce that is or is not edible. Tins will last more than likely forever on your shelf, but they're no longer allowed to be sold by the store once that date is reached. So, there's a lot of knee-jerk reaction around, oh my word, this date, it is going to be rotten. It is going to, I have to throw it away. And there's a lot of misconceptions around that, which is very sad because a lot of food gets wasted because of that in the home.
Would you say it's important for you from Nosh Food to actually go out there into communities and educate them? Because, it's about the education and the awareness. We ourselves are guilty of it as individuals because we, like you were just saying now, it's interesting between the sell-by date and the use-by date. And sometimes, the misconception is created with us, the consumer, where we go out and we buy a particular item and we say, oh goodness, I don't think this item is going to work for today because it's already got its use-by date. But when we look at the food, it still looks fresh. But inevitably you start, no, I have a habit. What I do is, normally is just go and give it, I'll cook it and then give it to somebody to use as opposed to throwing it away. So I think it's about going out there into the field itself from the Nosh Food point of view and educating the consumer and the corporate. And I'd say that would create such a nice communicative relationship where we could understand better and knowing that if we feel still uncomfortable, some people are really pedantic with certain things that they do, is then turn around and say, well, if you don't feel comfortable wanting to eat it, although it's still fresh, come to me and I will take it to you and give it to somebody that will really use it as opposed to it getting thrown in the bin. Because once it's thrown in the bin, if you look at the reclaimers, they're a typical example of what happens. I feel really bad on a Tuesday morning because what happens is I normally take food that's left over and that's still fresh and I pack it for the reclaimer, because the thing is, at the end of the day, it's just you want to give them their dignity back. What happens is you find this poor guy scratching and rummaging in the bin for food that he feels that is still okay, that he can eat. Whereas that same food can be packaged as opposed to being thrown in the bin and then given to the person in their hand to be able to eat, as opposed to pulling it out from it. And as we know, with it being in the bin comes a whole lot of other things attached to it.
Yeah, literally attached to it. So we're very careful in our waste management as well, because what we might consider, like you say, inedible, somebody who is really hungry might take a chance on, and then it starts becoming unsafe. So it is a big worry, and we do want to do a lot of educating into the communities. We don't have the resources at the moment. We don't have the capacity to really get into the communities. So what we try to do is we have a list of about 80 to 100 active beneficiary organizations that do the feeding, that have the soup kitchens and the feeding schemes. And we try to educate them as a first step around all of these concepts so that they can actually start dribbling down into their communities and educating around this until such time as we get capacity to really be able to get in there, and really have that national footprint where we reach all the communities. So for now, we're educating and we're teaching our beneficiary organizations, and they are passing that information on. And we're also trying to build some resources for our website where people can start having a look at the nutritional value of food, for example, and recipes, et cetera, and food safety and hygiene. And all of that is in the pipeline to try and actually get people to engage with food. It's the one thing we all have in common. And I'm very pleased that you're pushing this dignity and this interaction with your reclaimers, because for me, food, like I said, it's the one thing we all have in common. It's a basic necessity. And it is such a leveler. And it's such an amazing opportunity to connect and to create community around food.
Interesting that you bring it up from that particular aspect, because when it comes to the restaurants, how do you differentiate there? Because it's so difficult. I know previously there were situations, as far as restaurateurs were concerned, was the fact that you can't take somebody else's leftover food that they ate and give it to somebody else, due to the fact that that person could possibly be ill, and then you giving that same food to somebody else. So where do we draw the line here? How is it that you've worked with the restaurateurs to say, look, you own a restaurant, what is it that you can give us to be able to reach out to those that need it?
So indeed, food that has been scraped off a plate, which has already gone out to a customer, is not going to be fit for human consumption. So there is always the option of keeping that organic waste separate and engaging with the pig farmer or with a composting system to not let that go to landfill. But often a restaurant has to cater for a large number of customers. If you have a customer come and they don't have your favorite dish, more than likely you're not going to be so keen to go back there. So they have to over cater. And this is one of the pieces of rot in our food system, is we have to over cater for the customer's whim, because they will take the rest of their custom with them and not come back to you. So that portion that is over catered, the food that perhaps hasn't been served yet, or the food that is perhaps in the freezer, maybe got a bit of freezer burn, or those types of things we can access in the restaurant industry. But there are a lot of safeguards around it. Food that has been kept at a warm temperature for a long time might be less safe than something which obviously has been properly refrigerated or frozen. So often there's a reluctance to donate cooked food, but we're trying to work on a model where we actually engage with restaurants that they actually package their leftovers at the end of the day in takeaway containers, and that we then collect from the various restaurants en route and distribute straight away that evening, for example. But those kind of logistics, those are fairly big projects to set up. So there's a lot happening in the background. We've got lots of fantastic ideas, but we need capacity to be able to drive all of these plans. There's always a plan to be made. Our motto is start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And even if it is small, it doesn't have to be 40 pallets today. But you can always make some form of a difference in one person's life. That starfish principle. I made a difference to that one. That's very much what is sort of, underlies our ethos.
How does Nosh system work? Is it something that where we have to contact you, or do the corporates get in touch with you and say, look, we have these leftovers, there's a sell-by date there, we have to take it off the shelves? Is it people that are coming to find out about you that are contacting you, or are you basically going out in the field and creating the awareness of the fact that you do exist, and there is a place where we can bridge the gap of alleviating this wastage that we're having at the moment? And it's huge. I mean, when I heard the amount, it was actually blown away. I'm actually terrified by it, because to think that amount of food gets wasted is ridiculous.
It's 30% of our production. 30% of our national production. So, Nafisa, the answer, all of the options above. People can get hold of us to say, hey, I have 18 kilos of long stem broccoli that I haven't been able to sell, or any donor can get in touch with us. We've got plenty contact details on website and Facebook and Instagram. My number is very much in the public domain, which sometimes is not as much of a blessing as one would think. But they can always get hold of us, and we will try and hook them up with the nearest sort of beneficiary if we can't physically access it ourselves. So our Nosh model is not big warehouses and big trucks and a big cold chain. Every handling step means that the quality of the produce declines. So there is more waste. So we try to have as few handling steps in between the donor and the recipient as possible. So we work with a network of beneficiary organizations, a shallow network where we try to connect the donors with the beneficiary organizations, with the volunteers, with people who maybe have vehicles. So we're trying to create these teams all over that actually connect with each other under the umbrella of Nosh, which is trying to give guidance and sort of track record and sustainability. So a shallow system, anybody can get in touch, and we will do our best to put them in touch then with somebody who is close by. It's no use for a farmer from Mpumalanga to send me 16 tons of mangoes and then I get a truck and I send it straight back to my feeding schemes in Mpumalanga again. So we're trying to keep everything as local as possible, also from a carbon footprint perspective. To try and keep everything as local and create local communities around the need and the solution to the need. So just in a little bit of perspective around that 10.6 million tons, that terrifying figure, I finally did the number crunching of our tonnage stats for the last 2 years. So we've done just over 1,500, close on 1,600 tons of produce over the period of 2020-2021. And if I've taken into account 10% of wastage, of that would potentially be waste. But that means over the last 2 years, we've done the equivalent of 5.6 million cups of soup. We can't always say we have provided a full meal because we are contributing 2 meals. The feeding schemes have potentially other sources as well. So I don't feel right saying we've done so many meals, but we've done the equivalent of 5.6 million cups of soup in the last 2 years. And with such a small organization, with such a dedicated small team of volunteers, really our strength is lying in our beneficiary organizations. It's quite an achievement, and I'm incredibly proud of my very small team for having done that. So yeah.
I'm gonna butt in there and say yes. We're definitely from a Salam Media team as well, very proud of your, should we say, efforts and reaching out to there and bridging the gap in this particular system, something that gets forgotten and that gets taken for granted on that daily basis. So Anna, thank you so much for joining us and shedding light on such an important matter. And I think from this, you've taught us to change our mindset and think very differently the minute we pick up. I think when I go home today to have my lunch, I'm going to think very differently to what I did when we started off. So thank you so much for educating us on such an important and relative topic. We want to thank you. Our support is definitely with you, and we're hoping to create a better relationship going forward, a building relationship where we can help each other. Thank you so much and have a lovely one.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing from you and from your listeners and your readers, and I look forward to engaging. Let's feed people.
Thank you so much. Take care. That was Hanneke van Linge, and definitely talking to us about something I think we take for granted every single day. I mean, when we put that meal on the table and there's leftover, do we ask ourselves the question, what is it that we're going to do going forward with it? And I think speaking to her shed some light on that very important matter that I think we take for granted every single day. So thanks to Hanneke for bringing that to our attention. Stay with us. We'll be back with you in a minute.